Hi, friends. The callings of God. Getting millions of people saved is a wonderful and glorious thing, and getting them grounded as Bible believers is an entirely different matter. The latter requires committed, well trained, and grounded ministers of the gospel who can rightly divide the word of God. In many instances, Pentecostals in Africa have a very low threshold of who qualifies to pastor a congregation. The general excuse among Pentecostals is God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. To become a qualified minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ requires a calling from God, training, and apprenticeship. No matter what your level of academic qualifications, accepting the call to the ministry is just the first step. To be qualified for ministry requires preparation and consecration. Without these fundamental stages, many pastors are like a surgeon performing an operation on a patient when he has never been to medical school. At age 12, Jesus was already eloquent in the scriptures, but he had to grow both in wisdom and stature. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. Luke chapter 2, verse 41. Jesus waited and prepared until the age of 30 years before he started his public ministry. Time of preparation is never wasted. Apostle Peter was academically uneducated and untrained. He was a mere fisherman by trade. Peter sat under the teachings and observed the ministry of Jesus at close range for 3 years before he could go out and minister. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated and untrained men, they marveled and they realized that they had been with Jesus. Acts chapter 4, verse 13. The Apostle Paul, formerly known as Saul, was a very learned man, a Benjamite by lineage and of Hebrew ancestry. At age 13, Saul learned under a rabbi named Gamaliel for about 6 years. Paul went on to become a lawyer and was likely to have become a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court of 71 men. Paul was overzealous for his Jewish faith and led him down the path of religious extremism. Paul met Christ on the road to Damascus on his way to persecute Christians. After such a glorious transformation, Paul did not immediately preach or launch out his ministry. In spite of his high education, he understood that God's calling required preparation. He also understood that his dramatic spiritual conversion on the road to Damascus was not enough grounds to launch out his ministry. He instead went away and spent several years out in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, just waiting upon God and receiving the revelation directly from Jesus Christ about the gospel according to grace. Even the disciples were asked to wait on him in one accord in Jerusalem before they were commissioned to go out and minister. Ministry is a calling and not a source of employment or riches. From the scriptures, many that God has called and used spiritually were found busy and productive at their natural work. God looks at a man's commitment and passion in their natural work before using them in the spiritual. This does not necessarily mean that a man's natural skills qualify him for the spiritual work of the ministry. No. But neither does the Bible show a single instance where God picked a lazy person for his work. David was committed to his work as a shepherd boy, saving his sheep from lions and bears at the risk of his own life. He was not present when the rest of his brothers were paraded before the prophet Samuel to be anointed as king of Israel. God's grace found David at his workplace tending after livestock. Elisha was working in his fields when he saw Prophet Elijah. He left everything behind to become Prophet Elijah's help and a prophet, respectively. Jesus was the son of a carpenter until he started his ministry at age 30 years. Peter and his brothers were fishermen before they became Jesus' disciples. Paul was a tent maker before his conversion to Christianity. It would seem that people that have given up something of great value, like a career or business, to answer God's call are more likely to appreciate the personal sacrifice and weight that comes with the calling. Be blessed.